Hey, what's up? Arky here again. Welcome to this WindWalker PvP 101 guide. In this guide, I'll be covering all the basics to help you step into PvP smoothly. I'll be talking about gears, specs, basic playstyle, how to burst, and I'll be ending the video with general tips and tricks. In their current state, you could argue that WindWalker monks have the best mobility in the game, and it also gives them very solid survivability when played correctly. WindWalker monks can switch at any given moment, and they have super high reliable tools to set up for kills. And on top of that, their burst damage tools are available very often. So you can pretty much expect all that playing this class. So let's get right into the subject and talk about stat priorities. Well, first, just like any other melee class, you're going to want 3% hit. It's not a bad thing to be above the cap since your white hits have a really high miss chance, so they're always going to benefit from the extra hit, but it's not required, so don't go crazy trying to hit that 3% precisely. Anything above 3% is fine. Expertise is also good. You can stack up to 6%, which is kind of hard to hit, but my advice, try to get a couple of pieces and just don't reforge out of it. You'll have enough. Keep in mind, all abilities that miss, dodge, or get parried will offer you a chi refund, and all that chi that you spend generates extra Tiger Eye brew stacks, so bad expertise is not a complete DPS loss. After that, you'll want to get as much agility as possible, and then you want to go for crit, and finally haste and mastery. Some people will say haste is better, but unfortunately you don't get enough global cooldowns in PvP to spend all that extra energy generated by high haste, so crit is really the way to go. PvP power is a pretty bad stat overall, so you don't really need to get the PvP power from socket bonuses. And for survivability, well, as of patch 5.3, Stem and Rizal are very close to each other, so you can get anyone you prefer really. For weapons, you're going to want to buy 2 one-handers and enchant them with either double dancing steel or dancing steel with a weapon chain, depending on what you prefer. About your spec, well, this is the most commonly used spec by WindWalker monks. I'll go through the talents very quickly. So first of all, you got Tiger's Lust, which is your gap closer that breaks roots. It's very important against some classes like mages, druids, and shamans. Next, you have Chi Wave. This is the best healing tool of the tier. It takes exactly 7 times and bounces alternatively between friends and enemy targets. So by using this macro, you can make sure that you always get 4 healing ticks instead of 4 damaging ticks. Ascension offers more energy and the ability to hold 5 chi, which is very important for bursting, as I'll explain later. Ring of Peace is a good tool. It's the only one that can be used defensively on other players. In addition to that, it won't cause diminishing returns with all your other stun abilities. Diffuse Magic is generally the best option on this defensive tier, but if you know you're not fighting casters, you can spec for healing elixirs, which will be a lot better. And on the last tier, you might want to go with Zuin. It's a small DPS game when going offensive, and he's always nice to have. About Glyphs, well, first, Glyph of Touch of Karma is almost mandatory. It'll save your life so many times, and then you'll probably want to get Glyph of Touch of Death, which is very important for bursting. And for the third one, you could either get Glyph of Sparring, which is very nice RNG defensive damage reduction, or you could get Glyph of Paralysis, which removes dots on application, which is also very nice. Also remember to use Glyph of Blackout Kick, which is a minor glyph and offers a very nice DPS gain. Alright, now that we've covered all the technical aspects, we can jump into the heart of the subject and start talking about basic playstyle. The basic idea is to stop as much damage as possible just by creating pressure with your multiple CC tools. The control tools I'm referring to here are Disable, Spear Hand Strike, Ring of Peace, Fist of Fury, Grapple Weapon, Paralysis, and even Crackling Jade Lightning for the knockback in some cases. When the enemy pressure gets out of control, when it's too high to mitigate and keep under your control, you can just pop defensive cooldowns or you can just kite away. Play it very safe and don't be too aggressive when you could simply be avoiding damage. To deal good damage, it's pretty simple. Do everything you have to do to use Rising Sun Kick as much as possible. It should always be your first global, when possible of course. You can even use Expel Harm to generate chi while you're running to your target. That way you can start the damage as soon as you connect with them. Aside from that, keep the Tiger's Palm buff up and dump all your extra chi on Blackout Kick. A nice little burst rotation you can do when you get a free Blackout Kick proc is to stock up on 4 chi and then use 3 Blackout Kicks back to back. So that's about it for the basic playstyle, but what about bursting? What about actually killing people? This is what we want to do, right? Setting up burst as a WindWalker monk is fairly simple, but doing it against a really good player is a little tricky since he's always going to be moving around. Before you do serious burst, you want to stock up on 10 charges of Tiger Eye Brew. This will increase your damage by roughly 30%. One of the good things about this stack mechanic is that unlike every other class, you can actually pop your offensive cooldowns even if they're not fully ready yet. so you can still go very offensive even at 8, 6, or even 5 stacks. Once you see a good kill window, or simply a good window to apply pressure when your opponent doesn't have a lot of peels left, or when CC is on diminishing returns, or when an enemy player is extending his healer, well, you want to get ready for the burst and stock up on 5 chi. Having 5 chi is very important for maximum pressure. So for the actual doing damage part, your goal is to land a full Fist of Fury on a single target. Since you can't move while channeling, you need to make sure your target isn't moving before you start channeling. Against most classes, you can simply apply a disable to snare them, and they'll be moving slowly enough for you to channel on them. But against some classes like druids or hunters, slowing them isn't reliable. You'll need to apply a root with either double disable or spinning fire blossom if they're moving very fast and kind of outranging you a bit. Once your target is rooted, you have a nice window for a full Fist of Fury, but they'll probably be able to break your root in a single global cooldown, so you have to act very quickly. First, you want to pop Tiger Eye Brew. If you want, you can macro in that unused PvP trinket for maximum pressure, and since all brews and trinkets are of the global cooldown, you should be able to instantly do the second step, which is to start channeling your Fist of Fury on the rooted target. If you do this correctly, your target should be stunned and you should be pumping out punches on him. This will cause massive damage. While you're punching, two scenarios can happen. Either your target is nearly dead, and then you can spam your Touch of Death key as you're channeling, and it'll only trigger when your target hits that 10% threshold requirement. Otherwise, if your target's still pretty healthy, you can use Rising Sun Kick after the very last tick of Fist of Fury. Time it right for maximum pressure. While you're channeling Fist of Fury, you can also turn your camera around to stun a nearby target, either a healer or a DPS if it helps your cause. If a healer is close enough and not CC'd, it's a no-brainer. Turn your camera, land a stun on him, and go back to punching on your main target. If it's a DPS nearby and he's probably gonna peel, then you want him not to interrupt your Fist of Fury, so you're gonna want to stun him as well. Remember, Fist of Fury will hit everything within 10 yards, 180 degrees in front of you. And this also brings up a very important point. It's the fact that the Fist of Fury damage is spread between all the targets that are affected by it. So keeping that in mind, you basically want to aim your camera to maximize the damage on a single target. So if you're fighting a class with a pet or two classes that are fighting near each other, basically you want to position yourself in between the two players or the player and the pet, so that when you start channeling, you're only hitting the right guy. This will make a huge difference. And last, I'd like to end the video with a couple of tips and tricks, basically little survivability tricks or little clutch plays that you can pull off to tip the game in your favor. So here we go. Tip number 1, remember to use your Transcendence portal properly. On Z-axis maps, you can jump off and port back up. It's a very effective way to kite. Against hunters, elemental shamans, and druids, expect the knockoff. So you want to set up your portal close to them offensively. So that way when you get knocked off, you can port back up and keep the pressure up. Against locks and monks, you can set up your portal exactly on top of theirs. That way, whenever they port back, you can chase them and keep the pressure up. This might play against you though, so be careful. When you port, your character and portal exchange positions, so you might want to instantly reposition your portal right after you port. Tip number 2, most of your defensive abilities can't be used while silenced. The exceptions are Fortifying Brew and Touch of Karma, so remember to pop one of those if you're silenced and about to die. Tip number 3, in rated battlegrounds you can summon clones using Storm, Earth, and Fire to watch flag nodes. They will duplicate your spinning crane kick, which is a very effective way to interrupt flag capping. The clones will still be attacking and interrupt flag capping even while you're CC'd. Tip number 4, when going offensive on a healer, you can also pop Ring of Peace to blanket silence them. This will also be annoying to nearby enemies which are trying to peel. It's usually a good idea to pop it right after Fist of Fury. That way, you have enough time while channeling to decide if it's worth using it or not, depending on the kind of pressure you're putting out. Tip number 5, when your Chi Wave and Expel Harm aren't enough to keep you healed, you can pop Energizing Brew and spam healing orbs on yourself. This can also be done on other players if they really need the extra heals and you don't have anything else to help them live. Tip number 6, when your healer is getting CC'd and you don't have much to help them, you can use meditation to redirect CCs on yourself. This can be used to eat interrupts like Counterspell and Mind Freeze, but also CCs like Poly or even Hunter Traps when you don't have enough time to roll in range and eat the trap yourself. When you do it, call it out loud and clear so your healer knows he can free cast or he knows he doesn't have to trinket the scatter shot or the trap. But I still want to point out that in a regular scenario, you should be able to use Flying Serpent Kick to get in range fast enough to eat the trap. Tip number 7, never use Flying Serpent Kick, Roll, or Tiger's Lust early to get to your target. This is like a DK opening with Death Grip, it's a complete waste. When you don't have to, use your mount and run to your target at 200% speed instead of using a gap closer. Tip number 8, often you'll be slightly too far from your target to actually be hitting him. You can use Spinning Fire Blossom to root him and close the gap. If you don't have Chi, you can use Expel Harm to generate some. Or instead, you can just use Paralysis to close the gap with your target if you don't think you need to save it for anything else. Tip number 9, there's another well-known trick you can use to close a small gap. You can perform a half roll simply by jumping and casting roll in mid-air. The resulting roll will be half distance. Tip number 10, as I've mentioned plenty of times so far, you can use Expel Harm to generate Chi whenever you're not on your target. Tip number 11, mages can be tricky to deal with since they can blink out of your stuns. In general, you'll want to force a blink first using a root and then proceed to stunning them with Fists of Fury after using a gap closer like Flying Serpent Kick. A lot of mages are very uncomfortable with getting stunned with blink on cooldown and will ice block the stun almost instantly, even if you don't pop cooldowns. Another way of stunning them is to position yourself between the mage and a nearby wall. When the mage faces you, he'll also be facing the wall, which will prevent him from blinking out of range of your Fists of Fury. Tip number 12, Mistweaver Monk's healers have an ability that causes everything to miss on them after you stun them. Since the effect can only happen once every 10 seconds, a good way to deal with this is to get the proc out of the way using a cheap stun like a Bear Hug from Symbiosis or a War Stomp. Once the effect is out of the way, you can use Fists of Fury on them, which will stun them for half duration, followed instantly by another short duration Fists of Fury. It all adds up to a nearly identical duration compared to a regular full Fists of Fury effect. This will usually force a life cocoon if done with cooldowns up. Tip number 13, DKs will sometimes pop Remorseless Winter, which causes a snare effect to build up over time on you and stun you at 5 stacks. You can roll or diffuse magic at 4 stacks to clear the effect and avoid the stun. Tip number 14, when a rogue vanishes, you can instantly start channeling Fists of Fury where you think he might be. Since the range is so wide, you can usually get him out, even kill him sometimes. Tip number 15, remember you can dispel DK dots, Priest Devouring Plague, and even rogue poisons, which is nice if you're about to heal yourself. But overall, this is very annoying for the other team, so you can do it whenever possible. Tip number 16, when going hard on a hunter, if the healer is CC'd and you think he might be about to deterrent, you can start channeling Crackling Jade Lightning. The effect will still deal damage through deterrence and even through line of sight pillars. It doesn't do that much damage, but it's still better than no damage and will sometimes even land you a kill. It also provokes him to silence you, which is very helpful for your healer. Tip number 17, Disable is a powerful root with no cooldown. Use it on multiple players, like priests, to prevent them from running in and CCing your healer. Tip number 18, when rogues use evasion, obviously they'll be very hard to hit. You can try landing a full Fist of Fury on them. Once they're stunned, they will no longer be able to dodge anything. I doubt it's the case, but if you're a Tauren, you can stun them beforehand using War Stomp before starting the channel. This will guarantee that your Fists of Fury will stun on the very first tick, instead of relying on RNG before you get a first tick. Another alternative to that is to spec for Leg Sweep, which will never get dodged. But honestly, Ring of Peace is a very nice defensive tool against rogues, so I wouldn't recommend going for Leg Sweep, unless you want to play very offensive. Tip number 19, if you're playing with a priest, you can Tiger's Lust him, allowing him to run in and land a full fear more easily. Tip number 20, remember to use Paralysis properly. Keep in mind the effect lasts 6 seconds instead of 4 when performed from behind your target. If you're playing with a mage or a hunter, let them deal with the CC on the healer. Their CC abilities are much superior to Paralysis, and Paralysis is on the same DR as Polymorph, Trap, or any other similar ability. Instead, try to use Paralysis on DPS for peels or just for interrupts on CC. Tip number 21, in some very rare cases, usually in battlegrounds, you can knock people off using Crackling Jade Lightning. It's much easier to do if you snare the target first and then position yourself before starting to channel. The first auto attack landed on you will trigger the effect. Tip number 22, speaking of Crackling Jade Lightning, remember it can also be used to take out Grounding Totems and Spell Reflect. You have to stop moving a split second to actually channel it. It's not very hard to do and it helps your teammate quite a lot. And also it's worth mentioning that you have to be careful. In rated battlegrounds, you cannot interrupt flag capping using Crackling Jade Lightning, so don't try doing it. Instead, use Storm, Earth, and Fire for that purpose. Tip number 23, against enhancement shamans you can use diffuse magic to mitigate 90% of the ascendance damage since it's all magical damage, making diffuse magic a very good talent choice against enhancement shamans. It might not sound super important, but I actually did break a very nice win streak while making this video by not putting diffuse magic on my bar after respecking, so yeah, it's pretty important. So that's all I can think of for now, but I really hope you enjoyed this guide. If you did, you can go ahead and toss me a like. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more, and peace out.